They said he should have walked away. Just let the boy be taken. But sometimes a man doesn't make choices with his head. He makes them with whatever's left of his heart. That night, the wind didn't sleep, and neither did the ghosts. Something old was coming back. The town of Dry Creek sat quiet under a low, orange sky, the kind of quiet that made even the crows nervous. It was early autumn, and the wind carried a chill that whispered of endings. Dust rolled slow down the empty street, catching on porch rails and boot tracks that hadn't been swept in days. The wooden buildings leaned like old men, tired from holding back time. A saloon sign creaked softly as it swayed, and the church bell hadn't rung in weeks. Cattle pens stood empty. The blacksmith hadn't lit his forge since the summer storms. Folks in Dry Creek kept to themselves these days, eyes low, words shorter than they used to be. There was something in the air, heavy and waiting, like thunder that never cracks. Far off, beyond the ridge where the cottonwoods bowed to the wind, the land opened wide into nothing but golden grass and forgotten trails. It was the kind of place where things vanished. People, too. Out here, justice didn't wear a badge. It rode in quiet, with a cold stare and calloused hands. And that evening, as the sun fell slow behind the hills, trouble was already on its way. They called him Clay Morgan. 45, give or take. He didn't say much about his past, and folks knew better than to ask. He'd come to Dry Creek 5 years back with nothing but a worn saddlebag, a bad limp, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much war. Nobody knew if it was the army, some border fight, or just life that left him that way, but pain followed him like a shadow. Clay lived alone on the edge of town, on a stretch of land so dry even the snakes didn't bother. His house was small but stood solid, built by his own hands. Each morning before sunrise, he'd ride out and check the fence lines, talking only to his horse, a slow, steady mare named Mercy. He brushed her like she was made of glass. Gentle hands, like he was always holding back something. He never drank at the saloon, never played cards, never raised his voice. But the one time a drunk raised a hand to a woman, Clay was the one who stepped in, quick, quiet, and brutal. No one questioned his silence after that. He didn't owe anyone anything. He didn't want trouble. But deep down, some part of Clay still believed in right and wrong, even if the world didn't. And when that belief was tested one cold evening, it came down to one choice: ride away and forget, or stand up, alone, and face what was coming. It started just after sundown, when the shadows stretched long and the wind changed its tune. Clay was walking Mercy toward the barn when he heard it, shouting, boots thudding against hard dirt, a voice cracking with fear. He paused, hand on the reins, listening close. Then came the sound that pulled him into motion, a child's scream, sharp and short, cut off too fast. He moved without thinking, rifle slung low, boots crunching steady toward the edge of town. By the time he rounded the corner near the feed store, he saw them. 5 men, maybe 6, gathered like wolves. In the center was a boy, couldn't have been more than 10, barefoot, blood running down the side of his face. His dark hair was tangled, his chest heaving. One of the men held a rope. "He's the one," someone spat. "Caught him stealing from Myers' shed." Another chimed in, voice hot with hate. "Damn kid's a scout. Bet he's marking our land for a raid." The boy didn't speak. He just stared ahead, trembling but not crying. Clay stepped forward. "Leave him," he said, calm but loud enough to cut through the noise. The men turned, surprised to see him. One laughed. "Ain't your business, Morgan." Clay didn't argue. He just stepped between them and the boy. His rifle wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. The message was clear. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of the men cursed under his breath and spit in the dirt. "You'll regret this." Maybe. But Clay didn't flinch. He reached down and helped the boy to his feet. The mob didn't follow. Not that night. But the fire in their eyes said this wasn't over. The boy didn't say a word on the walk back to Clay's place. He limped slightly, barefoot and bruised, but didn't ask to stop. Clay didn't ask questions either. He just handed the boy his coat and kept walking slow beside him, the quiet between them thick but not uncomfortable. When they reached the cabin, Clay opened the door and pointed to the stool near the fire. The boy sat, stiff and alert, like he didn't know how to be still. Clay poured water into a tin basin, soaked a rag, and cleaned the dried blood from the boy's temple. The boy winced but didn't pull away. Later, Clay slid a plate of beans and cornbread in front of him. The boy hesitated, then nodded once, just once, and ate like he hadn't in days. Not a single word passed between them that night. But when Clay laid a blanket down near the fire and motioned for the boy to sleep, the boy looked at him, really looked at him, and something in his shoulders loosened. They didn't know each other, but in that quiet, something unspoken settled. A thread of trust barely there. And in places like Dry Creek, that was more than most ever got. By morning, the town already knew. Whispers traveled fast in Dry Creek. Faster than trains, faster than bullets. At the general store, folks muttered behind coffee tins. At the saloon, the bartender poured slower, listening more than he served. Even the preacher, who rarely stepped off his porch, stared a little longer toward the hills where Clay Morgan lived. Boys astray, someone said. Might be Apache. Might be worse. Clay should know better, another added. Ain't his fight. Some told the story like the boy had pulled a knife. Others swore he was just scouting, waiting for a war party. But no one mentioned the blood on his face or the fear in his eyes. That part didn't fit the story they wanted. Sheriff Larkin, worn and weary from years of looking the other way, stood outside the jailhouse with a cigarette that never lit. If Morgan wants to babysit, let him. But I ain't cleaning up after it. Even folks who respected Clay kept their distance now. A few glanced toward his cabin with pity, most with suspicion. He's protecting one of them, someone whispered. But none of them saw what Clay saw. They didn't see the way the boy flinched at loud noises, or how he folded his food in cloth like he didn't know when he'd eat again. The town had made up its mind. Trouble was coming. And to them, Clay Morgan had invited it through his front door. 3 days passed. The boy spoke only once, to tell Clay his name was Eli. That morning, the sky was a flat gray. No sun, no rain, just quiet. Too quiet. Around midday, Clay heard horses. 4 of them, maybe 5, coming slow up the ridge. He didn't rush. He just stepped out onto the porch, rifle resting across his arm. Eli stood behind the curtain, eyes wide but silent. The riders stopped at the gate. At the front was Jeb Tucker, thick-shouldered, face like boiled leather, and mean in the way a man gets when nobody ever told him no. Behind him were a few others. Myers, who claimed the boy had stolen from him, and 2 more Clay didn't recognize. Jeb spoke first. We ain't here to fight, Morgan. Clay didn't answer. We just want the boy. That's all. Clay looked at them, then glanced back through the window where Eli stood, barely breathing. You ain't getting him. Jeb's jaw tightened. He's one of them. And they're watching, waiting. That kid's a signal. You don't know what you're dealing with. Clay's voice was steady. Maybe, but I know a mob when I see one. Myers stepped forward. He stole from me. Clay didn't blink. You want your sack of flour? I'll buy you 2. But if you come past that gate, you better be ready to pay for more than grain. The men shifted in their saddles. One reached for his belt, but Jeb raised a hand to stop him. This ain't done, Jeb said. No, Clay replied. It ain't. They turned their horses and rode off, dust rising behind them like smoke. Clay stood there long after they disappeared, eyes fixed on the horizon. Trouble had a shape now, a name, and a timetable, and it was only a matter of time before it returned, meaner and ready to burn. That night, the boy couldn't sleep. Clay heard him rustling by the hearth, sitting upright with the blanket clutched around his shoulders. The fire had burned low, and the wind rattled the shutters like bones tapping on wood. After a long silence, Eli spoke. My father told me to run if they came, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Said not to look back. Said they wouldn't stop. Clay didn't respond. He just stirred the fire, letting the flames grow steady again. They killed my uncle, Eli continued. Burned our wagon. We were only passing through. He paused, swallowing hard. They think I'm a thief, but I was just looking for food. My little sister, she didn't make it. Clay's jaw tightened, but still he said nothing. Eli looked at him then, his eyes darker than any boy's ought to be. You could have let them take me. Why didn't you? Clay met his gaze. Because someone should have done the same for me. The boy didn't speak after that. He just lay down again, his back to the fire. But Clay noticed something different in him the next morning. his shoulders straighter, his eyes sharper. There was pain in him, but there was also fire. Quiet fire, the kind that doesn't burn out easy. For the first time since he arrived, Eli fed the horse without being told. He stacked the wood, swept the porch. He didn't ask for thanks, and Clay didn't offer it, but he saw it. The next time they came at night. No torches, no shouting, just silence and 6 riders cutting through the dark like wolves. Clay had expected it. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, lantern lit beside him. Eli waited inside, holding the pistol Clay had taught him to load. The first man didn't get far. Clay's warning shot cracked the stillness, sending the riders scattering behind the fence line. Another tried to circle wide, but Mercy neighed loud, giving him away. Clay hit the post next to his shoulder, close enough to change his mind. Then came the voice. Not Jeb's, a younger one, shaky. We ain't looking for blood, Morgan. Just a kid. Clay stood tall. Then you came to the wrong place. They lingered another minute, long enough for Clay to feel it in his bones, but finally, one of the horses turned. Then another. The riders peeled away, one by one, swallowed by the dark. When the dust settled, Clay lowered his rifle. Eli stepped out slowly, face pale but steady. You all right? Clay asked. Eli nodded once. Word got out by morning. Not everyone agreed with Clay's choice, but no one challenged it again. The town stayed quiet, careful. A few folks even started tipping their hats again when they passed him. But Clay didn't care for their change of heart. He hadn't done it for them. The days that followed were quiet, but not the heavy kind of quiet. It was the kind that gave things room to breathe. Eli fell into a rhythm. Each morning, he fed the chickens without being asked. He'd walk the fence line beside Clay, fixing posts and learning the land like he was part of it. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice no longer shook. Clay taught him how to patch leather and sharpen a blade. In return, Eli showed him how to track by broken twigs and how to find clean water under dry earth. They worked side by side, saying little but building something between them, something slow and solid. One evening, Clay found Eli sitting by the horse, stroking Mercy's mane. The boy whispered to her in a language Clay didn't know, soft and warm like the wind before rain. That night, Clay left the door to his cabin unlatched for the first time in years. Eli noticed, said nothing, but he slept deeper than he had since he arrived. There were still 2 broken souls living on the edge of nowhere. But something had shifted, and out here, even the smallest bit of peace was a kind of miracle. It was just before sunrise when Clay heard the horse. One rider, coming slow down the trail from the north. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, though something told him he wouldn't need it. The man rode with purpose, straight-backed, weathered face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His coat was torn, stained with road dust and time. But his eyes, dark like Eli's, held something deeper. Recognition, loss, fire. Eli stepped outside, barefoot, blinking at the light. When he saw the man, he froze. "Father," he whispered. The rider dismounted, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Eli ran to him, arms wrapping tight around his waist. The man held him close, saying nothing, his hand resting firm on the back of his son's head. Clay watched, silent as always. The man looked up at him, eyes sharp but respectful. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped bundle, dried meat, herbs, tools, something carved from bone. "For the debt," the man said simply. Clay nodded once. "Wasn't one owed?" "Still," the man replied, "you stood when others turned." And with that, he stayed. Not long, just long enough to help repair the roof and share one fire. But it was enough. Hope had come full circle. The man left just as he came, quiet before dawn, without asking for thanks. After he rode off, Clay found something left behind on the porch rail. A small hand-carved figure, shaped from cedar, no taller than his thumb. It was a wolf, standing guard over a smaller wolf pup. The grain of the wood shimmered in the morning light, smooth and worn like it had been held many times. Clay turned it over in his palm, saying nothing. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant. Later that day, Eli took the carving and placed it on the mantel above the fire. It stood next to a rusted horseshoe and an old photograph Clay never spoke about. The cabin, once bare and cold, now held stories in its shadows. Outside, The wind had changed again. Softer. The cottonwoods swayed like they were breathing easier. Eli walked the edge of the pasture with Mercy at his side, barefoot still, but taller somehow. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was part of this land now. And Clay? He leaned back in his chair on the porch, watching the sun rise slow across the hills, the wolf carving still warm in his hand. Some debts weren't paid in gold. They were paid in silence, in presence, in the way you stay when it would be easier to leave. In places like Dry Creek, men aren't remembered for how loud they were, but for the weight they carried in silence. Clay Morgan never asked for thanks, never wanted to be seen as a hero. But when it mattered, he stood between hate and a boy who didn't deserve it. Not with speeches, not with rage, just with his body, his hands, and a simple, unshakable choice. And that boy, he didn't just survive, he became something stronger, because someone believed he was worth saving. That's the thing about courage. It doesn't always ride in with guns blazing. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet moments, in the way a man opens his door, shares his fire, or hands over his last piece of bread. And maybe, just maybe, that's what justice really looks like out here. Not a badge, not a bullet, just one soul refusing to look away. If this story settled deep in your chest, like dust that won't shake loose, stick around. There's more where that came from. Subscribe for more untold tales from the Old West, where silence speaks louder than gunfire, and every man carries a story, whether he tells it or not.